Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 314, which is going down this weekend. It's an absolutely stacked event. We've got the UFC, the vacant UFC Featherweight Championship on the line. Now Ilia Topuria has vacated his belt and moved up to lightweight. We've got a featured co-main event, which means 5 rounds between Michal Chandler and Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. I've got my opinions on why that fight is a featured co-main event, meaning 5 rounds, which we'll get into shortly. We've got Gene Lord Silva on the card. We've got Patricio Pitbull making his UFC debut, coming over from PFL/Bellator, an absolute legend of the sport. The card has got it all from top to bottom. So excited to break it down, so excited to watch the fights on Saturday night, and we'll get straight to it in this podcast. But just really quickly before we jump into the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMA Play 365. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a fun gambler that wants to just play the fun parlays, whether that's a fun parlay that you want us to build for you, whether it's a fun parlay that you want to build yourself, add more legs to it maybe, we've got that section for you. Whether you're a long-term gambler that also likes to make your own decisions but likes to understand why we're recommending certain bets with full written breakdowns, then we've got a section for you as well, including the betting strategies that you could play for the weekend. And then if you are somebody that just wants to tail exactly what the professional handicapper is betting, which is myself, then we've got that section for you as well. And also, every single betting package and subscription comes with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC fight, of every UFC event. All the packages are super affordable. Our ethos is we want you to make that money back that you spend with us as quickly as you possibly can so you can start profiting on your bets. So for one event, it's just $5. Monthly, it's $9.99. Or if you want to take advantage of our annual offer, it's just $99 for the full year. That's all at MMAplay365.com. And that's it with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way. Let's get breaking down some fights. And as always, we start in the main event. This main event is for the vacant UFC Featherweight Championship between Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopes. Now, Alexander Volkanovski, of course, is a former long-reigning featherweight champion. At one point just seemed absolutely unbeatable, but this sport's unforgiving, and at some point, those unbeatable fighters, unless your name is Khabib Nurmagomedov, suddenly become somewhat unbeatable. And Volkanovski found that when, of course, he met Ilia Topuria. And look, I feel like this is kind of a passing of the torch fight, and Diego Lopes is the fighter that has risen like ridiculously quick to the top of the division, and the reason why is just because he's come on leaps and bounds, he's developed, he's improved, but he's just a really difficult fighter to beat. And some fighters have that about them where, you know, some fighters can be world class but still they have the ways that somebody might be able to beat them. But with Diego Lopes, he's not unbeatable, of course, but he's just very difficult to beat because of how do you beat him. Like, this is a guy that is absolutely credentialed from a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu perspective, a legitimate black belt, very dangerous as well, but also comes from a family of BJJ black belts, like siblings of BJJ black belts. His father's a BJJ black belt. His uncle is a BJJ black belt. They've even got a BJJ coral belt within the family as well, and I think there's only about 30 to 35 of them that exist on the planet today. So with Diego Lopes, he is absolutely elite when it comes to the grappling on the mat. But because of that, like, he's worked on his striking, he's super big and physical for the division, he's got power in both of his hands, but more importantly, Diego Lopes can absolutely crash forwards and be super aggressive against anyone that he fights, because if he overcommits, if he overexerts himself, if he gets off balance with, this heavy pressure style of coming forwards and crashing the pocket, and his opponent decides to clinch up or level change and take him down, well, good luck on the mat with Diego Lopes. So he's got that ability to be able to do what he wants on the feet. Again, throwing big hard kicks. His opponent isn't going to be catching kicks and wanting to take him down unless, like I say, they fancy themselves on the mat, which I don't think anybody in the division is going to give Lopes too many issues on the mat. Of course, we saw him against Movsar Evloev, but even that fight, like, Lopes had a couple of situations and a couple of positions where, it was looking dangerous for Evloev. And, Lopes, that was his UFC debut. I'm sure he took it on short notice as well against a beast like Movsar. So, look, Lopes is just an absolute animal when it comes to the ground game. And even if Volkanovski does take him down and remains safe from any submissions that Lopes throws up, I think Lopes could just get back up to his feet. Volkanovski was always one of those fighters that will rinse and repeat takedowns, but the reason he's rinsing and repeating takedowns is because his top game isn't super heavy and super controlling, so his opponents can get back up. And those are opponents with a lesser grappling and ground game than Diego Lopes. So I kind of think that on the flip side, Lopes's area where I think that he needs to really improve is within the wrestling. His striking's good, powerful, and he's got that pressure like I've spoken about. We've already spoken about and touched upon the grappling, but Lopes doesn't really look for takedowns. When fights hit the mat, when fights hit the mat in a Diego Lopes fight, it's normally because there's been a knockdown or, there's been a situation where there's been a scramble in the clinch and the fight's just ended up on the mat, rather than Lopes, level changing, shooting in for a single leg, a double leg takedown. That's where I'd like to see the improvement in Lopes's game. But look, he's getting the job done with his current fighting style. He's still developing and improving as well. So who am I really to say that, I think he needs to work on X, Y, and Z. But I would just love it if Diego Lopes had like a real sick double leg or a real sick single leg or chain wrestle to get fights down to the mat and then just absolutely like rolled all over somebody in regards to the jiu-jitsu. And then bring in the Brian Ortega fight, because listen, Brian Ortega's a legitimate BJJ black belt as well. And look what Diego Lopes did to him. So I think Lopes is by far the best straight grappler in the UFC. In the UFC featherweight division. Maybe not go as far as the UFC as a whole, but he's definitely up there. And yeah, look, I really like Lopes. Like I say, I think it's a passing of the torch kind of fight. Now, I've spoken a lot about Lopes already. Moving on to Volkanovski, look, I don't think Volkanovski's declining. I still think that he's a fighter that's got a lot of qualities, that a fighter that is still going to win fights, within the top three of the division. Like, I really don't see, at least, right now, the decline. Like, Ilia Topuria is just that good. Islam Makhachev is literally just that good. I think that Volkanovski's still going to make this fight competitive. He's still going to make this fight somewhat close. Like, I don't think Lopes is just going to absolutely whitewash Volkanovski. So I think it's going to be a scrap. I think it's going to be a good fight. Volkanovski is one of these fighters that's always been super well-rounded. Elite striker, good wrestler, good grappler. Like, he can really put it all together at the top of, at the top of the sport against the best of the best. So, yeah, look, I still think Volkanovski is a fighter that is a world-class fighter at the top of the division. I just maybe don't think he's the elite fighter that he was when he was the current champion, to the point where, you wouldn't really have put anybody against him to beat him, apart from obviously, then the Islam Makhachev fight. But yeah, I think it's a really good fight. It just seems to me, and I have already used this phrase and mentioned it, I think it is a passing of the torch type of fight. And historically, personally, I've done well in these types of spots. Just off the top of my head, you can even go back years and years. Robert Whittaker to beat Jacare was one of them in the middleweight division, where, a lot of people didn't see Whittaker, potentially making that jump in that high jump in that specific fight. But then you've got other fights where Israel Adesanya took over from Robert Whittaker. I was one that predicted that. And I'm not saying I was the only one, by the way. I'm sure other people did as well. But what I'm talking about is just me personally. I feel like I'm good at spotting these types of fights. And then other ones, Dricus du Plessis taking over at middleweight. Then you've got Volkanovski taking over at featherweight against Max Holloway. Ilia Topuria taking over at featherweight against Volkanovski. So those fights, and again, I know they're not in chronological order, I've just been trying to pluck them out my head, off the top of my head, but I feel like I've done a good job at spotting these passing of the torch types of fights, and I kind of feel like this is another one of those spots where, you know, it is a passing of the torch. Diego Lopes has rightfully earned this spot. Volkanovski is now fighting for the belt, now it's vacated, and he was the reigning champion for a long time in the division, but again, you know, the division's moving fast, the sport moves fast, and I just think it's Diego Lopes's time. So, look, if you want the analytic perspective and the style versus style perspective, I just think that, like I said, Diego Lopes is so difficult to beat because I don't think Volkanovski is going to beat him wrestling and grappling. I really don't think Volkanovski is going to want to take him down at all, if I'm being honest. I'd be quite surprised if that was the game plan, to get on top of Lopes, because it'll just be putting the fight absolutely in Lopes's world. And then on the feet striking, like, yeah, Volkanovski's a good striker. I've already said he's a world-class striker, but I think that, you know, for Volkanovski to win this fight, it's going to have to be a point scoring style in regards to landing in and out, trying not to get hit from Lopes. Every time Lopes crashes forwards, Volkanovski just strikes, moves out, exits, angles off, tries to get back into the centre of the cage. But what that's going to look like from a judge's perspective is quite defensive from Volkanovski. And then from Volkanovski's perspective, it's also, you know, fighting the majority of the fight on the back foot, because you're constantly just trying to try to evade that forward pressure in the fighter that is trying to close the distance, which puts you on the back foot. And that's not where Volkanovski kind of thrives from a striking perspective. Volkanovski is always the type of fighter that likes to push his opponent backwards, and I just don't see it. I think if Volkanovski tries to really pressure Diego Lopes here and come forward and land on him, then Lopes will just be very grateful and appreciate the fact that Volkanovski's closed the distance for him and done half of the job for him, because that's what Lopes is going to want to do. Lopes will want to be in that boxing range. He'll want to land the hard shots, the hard combinations, cause all this chaos, so then he can get a hold of Volkanovski, potentially put Volkanovski on his back as well. And that's another thing. I think if Volkanovski does get put on his back, then Lopes is going to have so many opportunities to run the clock down, get that top control time, but also look for submissions, because I kind of think Volkanovski might panic a little bit if he's put on his back. It's not a position where, you know, many fighters have put him on before, and he has got good takedown defense. But if this is a car crash type of fight where Lopes is creating all this chaos in the center of the cage, then we might see Volkanovski get put down. And Volkanovski's always done a really good job of defending, like, your traditional wrestling, your single legs and your double legs. But again, like I've already mentioned, Lopes's fights don't have that single leg and double leg attack from Lopes. He finds ways to get fights down to the mat outside of the traditional wrestling. And again, if Volkanovski's put on his back, knowing what he knows about Lopes's grappling game, he could potentially panic, try and get to the cage as quick as he can, show his back. Lopes gets a hook in. Suddenly now it's looking dangerous. I just think it's going to be that type of fight. For Volkanovski to win here, I think Volkanovski's going to have to put a point-scoring clinic on Lopes, but I just think that's going to be so much easier said than done with the way Lopes fights, with how aggressive he's going to be, with how much I think that Volkanovski's going to be on the back foot as well. And then when you start to look at the biggest gap in skill in this fight, that's with Lopes and the grappling. So from that style versus style analytical perspective, outside of the narrative that I just think it's a passing of the torch type of fight with Lopes, with it being his time, that's your style versus style that I'm seeing the fight as well. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Diego Lopes to win this fight and become the new UFC featherweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got the featured co-main event, 5 rounds between Iron Michael Chandler and Paddy the Baddie Pimblett. Now, I love the fact that this fight's 5 rounds, and I said in the introduction that I've got my opinions on why I think it's a 5-round fight, and I'll lead straight with that. I think it's a 5-round fight because if Paddy Pimblett wins this fight, the UFC are going to have wanted to have booked him in a 5-round fight before giving him a title shot, and I actually think that's what's going to happen. I think if Paddy comes out here and beats Chandler, especially if he finishes him as well, I think that Paddy's got to be the next in line for a title. The UFC at the minute, and again, This is very narrative based, what I'm about to say, which can't be taken into too much context when you're looking at overall predicting a fight, because it should be style versus style. But the UFC are lacking a real superstar right now, a real name, a real face of the sport, someone that can talk the talk and walk the walk, a lot like Conor McGregor. The UFC are lacking that star. They tried to make Sugar Sean O'Malley that star, and it didn't work out because Merab beat him. Alex Pereira was a fighter that didn't do a lot of talking, but was an absolute fan favorite. Well, still is an absolute fan favorite. Dangerous, stoic. The UFC probably thought, okay, well, this is the superstar that, it's a different type of superstar to Conor McGregor. But then Alex Pereira got beaten by Magomed Ankalaev. So at the minute, the UFC doesn't have that rising superstar that is a champion, that's beating everybody, and Paddy fits or ticks every single box for that. If he can be the best fighter in the division and be the champion, because he, like I say, he walks the walk, but he also talks the talk. He's got a mouth on him, but he's clever with it. He's very smart. He's intelligent. It's a lot like Conor McGregor and the rise that we saw with McGregor to the top. I think Paddy could replicate and sort of be that next version of Conor McGregor with the way he talks. The thing is with Conor McGregor was knocking everybody out. He was backing up that talk and just putting on ridiculously exciting fights, crushing everybody on the way to the top. And that's something that is still yet to be seen from Paddy Pimblett. But like I say, in X amount of time, if Paddy ends up being a champion, then he's going to be the UFC superstar. And I think the UFC see that as well. So again, coming back to the featured co-main event, I think the fight's 5 rounds because I think the UFC are anticipating Paddy Pimblett winning this fight and then fighting for the title. And I kind of feel like the UFC probably want this fight to go into the 4th and 5th round as well, just so Paddy is absolutely prepared for that 5-round title fight. But Paddy's not somebody that I think gasses too hard or anything anyway. But yeah, look, it's a featured co-main event against a fighter who's a former dominant Bellator champion, multi-time Bellator champion. Since he came into the UFC, he's been nothing but at the top of the UFC's division as well. So it's a real good fight for Paddy Pimblett to prove that he's at the level to be able to rise to the top. And look, in regards to his grappling, I think I said this during the last breakdown when Paddy Pimblett fought Bobby Green. I bet Paddy Pimblett there at plus money, I think, as well. But Paddy Pimblett is absolutely elite with his grappling, with his BJJ. Like, people don't realize it and give it enough credit, but Paddy is like legitimately one of the best grapplers in straight grapplers in the division, and one of the best straight grapplers in the UFC. Like, that's not an opinion, that's fact. He's absolutely elite with his grappling. Whether you don't want to believe it, it's fine. Maybe you just haven't seen enough of it at the top level to believe it yet. But I'm telling you, like, Paddy's a fighter that is very well known to the UK fan base for obvious reasons. He is elite with his grappling. The issue with Paddy, in my opinion, is the fact that he can be hit. He's got that aura about him, and, he says, Scousers don't get knocked out. But I promise you, Chandler's going to put that to test in this fight, and it's a really intriguing fight stylistically, because I think if Paddy does get this fight down to the mat, Chandler's going to get wrapped up. I genuinely think that Paddy's that good on the mat. However, all fights start standing. Chandler's super dangerous. He's got a wrestling background as well. So if Paddy's shooting in on a double leg or a single leg and trying to get Chandler down that way, I think that's going to be tough. Like, I kind of think that Paddy has got to get this fight down to the mat in similar ways of what I've just described with Diego Lopes. Because again, Diego Lopes, as I've already mentioned in that last breakdown, isn't your double leg, single leg type of guy. And I think that's going to be the wrong direction for Paddy here. I think it's more body lock, try and trip Chandler down to the mat. But I think early on, I think Paddy's just got to really bide his time here, because Chandler comes out super fast and super hard. And that version of Chandler is going to be very difficult for Paddy to try and tie up and take down. But after sort of 5 minutes, 7.5 minutes, maybe even if it takes Michael Chandler 2.5 rounds to start slowing down, that's where Paddy's going to get him. And I think if Paddy's smart here, he's going to be able to do that. Of course, there is going to be that chance early if Chandler does overcommit, overexert, gets himself off balance, comes forwards too reckless to try and knock Paddy out early, and maybe Paddy is really good there at just, sort of getting a body lock, trying to take the back, dragging Michael Chandler down. But I kind of feel that Paddy can be hittable, and this is where it's going to be super dangerous for him early on, because I think Chandler's going to be super live to knock Paddy Pimblett out, especially early in this fight. However, I've just got a feeling that Paddy's just going to weather that storm. I think he's going to get hit. He might even get dropped in the first round, but I think he gets back up and he makes Michael Chandler try and get him out of there and try and finish the fight, but Chandler doesn't. And once Chandler doesn't, and he's expended a load of energy, I think that's where Paddy gets at him. And even at that point, when Chandler's a little bit tired and the gas has run out a little bit, I think Paddy's could then potentially start putting it on him from a striking perspective and look for a knockout as well. So I kind of feel like Paddy Pimblett's going to have two paths to victory here. I think he could knock Chandler out, but Chandler's got to be tired to do that. And I think that Paddy could potentially get Chandler down and wrap him up in a submission as well. If he doesn't get a finish, I think it could be quite close on the scorecards in regards to Chandler potentially taking the fight early, Pimblett coming on late. But I just think I just think it's Paddy Pimblett's time, a passing of the torch type of fight. Not in the same way as Lopes and Volkanovski, because that is for a straight title fight, this fight. But I think that Pimblett is on his way to a title fight at the very least, and this is the next step for him to do that. Like I say, would it shock me if this fight, if I didn't watch this fight, woke up the following morning and saw that Michael Chandler had knocked him out? Well, no, because Chandler's got insane power. And also, Paddy is somewhat hittable and does take some big shots at times. So that's not going to surprise me. But I just think Paddy's the better overall fighter here, with the better gas tank as well. And like I say, I kind of feel that it's the right time, the right place for Paddy Pimblett. So for those reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Paddy, the Paddy Pimblett, to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be fun, and one that I think a lot of people are going to be excited for a specific reason. We've got Bryce Mitchell versus Gene Lord Silva. And of course, everyone's going to be excited for this, and the specific reason is everybody is hoping that Gene Silva absolutely floors Bryce Mitchell, knocks him out. The crowd's going to go wild. Obviously, Bryce Mitchell, I'm not going to get too much into it because I don't want to spend too long talking about it when I should be breaking fights down and, looking at it from that side. But also, I don't want anything to have been misquoted or for YouTube to jump in and do anything to the channel or whatever. But look, Bryce Mitchell made specific comments online. You'll be able to find it in a quick, Twitter or X search and find out what he said. Highly controversial. And yeah, look, everyone's got the same opinion. I don't need to go into anything here. Everybody knows, or all the hardcore fan base at least knows what he said, knows that it's wrong, knows that it's closed-minded and every other adjective under the sun. And the UFC have booked Bryce. I mean, to the point where Josh Emmett's knockout of Bryce Mitchell, when he flatlined him, even that went re-viral because of what Bryce Mitchell said. And I think everybody's hoping that Gene Silva does the exact same thing. Except the difference between Gene Silva and Josh Emmett is Emmett's got that nuke, that missile that obviously put Bryce Mitchell out cold, whereas Gene Silva will butcher you. He's a different type of knockout animal than Emmett. Emmett will fight, bang, knockout. Whereas Gene Silva will piece you up, cut you up, bloody you up before he knocks you out and finishes you. And I think that's why everyone's so excited about Gene Silva. Not just specifically for this fight, but I just mean moving forwards. And look, Gene Silva has got the personality, he's got the skill set, he's got the finishers to be able to go to the top of this division as well. And I think this is the next step for him. Now, let's not get it twisted, and coming back just to a straight analytical perspective, Bryce Mitchell is, a legitimate wrestler and grappler in MMA. Very good. You can't take that away from him, no matter what he said on social media. Like I've already covered, completely wrong, uneducated and disgusting. But in regards to his MMA skill set, he's a very good wrestler and he's a very good grappler. So Silva has got to mind his P's and Q's in this fight. Silva can't just go in there and just, rush forwards recklessly and try and take his head off straight away, which I don't think he's going to do. Like, for as crazy as what Silva seems, I think there's a good level of fight IQ in there as well. So I don't think he's going to put himself in a position where he's giving up easy takedowns to Michal. But he's got to be aware that if Michal does put him on his back, Michal is a very, very good grappler in, at this level in the UFC. He's got twister submission before. He's just very good on top, and he's a very good positional grappler as well. So what I mean by that is if his opponent is trying to get back up, trying to reverse and escape positions, anything like that, Michal will see what's happening and he'll look to put like a counter block on a specific transition, a specific position transition from the opponent on the back to counter that and put a block on it to keep them down. So it's not just an attack for Michal and a submission hunt and ground and pound. He also looks for what his opponent's doing, where they're moving, and to try and counteract that, to stop them from potentially getting out of a position. So he's very aware both offensively and defensively on the mat, very good grappler. But I think that it is going to be difficult for Michal to take Silva down, at least often, to be able to get some good work put in because of the way Silva fights. Every time Michal will come forwards to try and shoot a takedown, I think Gene Silva's going to crack him. I think he's going to do what Silva does, and I think he's going to butcher Bryce Mitchell up a bit before he does knock him out. And like I say, Silva's got to mind the P's and Q's, but you've also got to be real about how Michal gets takedowns here, because Silva's also not a fighter that's going to be on the back foot. If you want to try and come forwards on Silva, then he'll stand his ground and crash and allow you to crash the pocket. But Silva thrives in that chaos, in that violence. So I think it's going to be Michal on the back foot. I think it's going to be Silva moving forwards. And if that's the case, Mitchell's just not going to have that many solid attempts to be able to get Gene Silva down, because shooting a takedown on the back foot is going to provide a lesser success rate than it is if you're moving forwards and trying to shoot takedowns. So again, stylistically, I kind of feel like it favors Silva. Again, from a trajectory perspective, Silva's the fighter on the rise. Silva's the fighter that is, again, just butchering people before knocking them out. Kind of reminds you of, a Tony Ferguson back in the day. So, yeah, look, and even when you are talking about the ground game, like, Gene Silva's got a ground game as well. Like, he's not as if he's a striker with no wrestling and grappling. Like, he's a well-rounded fighter. So I think it's a tough fight stylistically for Michal. And I think and hope that Gian Silva absolutely sparks Michal, makes a big knockout, highlight reel type of finish, potentially takes that bonus as well because of it. For those reasons, I'm picking Gian Silva to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an exciting one. We've got Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. Now, Pitbull's been signed from Bellator/PFL. This is a fighter that's a multi-time champion at Bellator. He was a double champion in the featherweight division and the lightweight division. And he also went to make history as well. Whilst he was a double champion, he went to become a triple champion and dropped down to bantamweight to fight Sergio Pettis. But he lost that fight, and I just don't think he lost that fight because he wasn't the better fighter. I just think that, look, weight classes are there for a reason, and sure, double champion is achievable for some fighters that can float between two divisions, but floating between three divisions when it's above and below the division that you normally fight at, I just think that's really tough. And to be fair, even if you want to argue and go two divisions below or two divisions higher, it's going to be tough. Like, the two divisions lower because you'll be cutting so much weight and like really killing your body, and then two divisions higher just because you're going to be fighting someone that's like ridiculously bigger, stronger, and yeah, look, and again, not only that, but you're also, to become a triple champion, you're also fighting the best fighter in that division as well. It's not as if you're fighting like a mid-level fighter, with you giving up either strength and physicality or that weight cut as well. So look, credit to Pitbull, like, he was the first fighter that attempted to be a triple champion in a major promotion. Didn't quite work, but I love the fact that he's come to the UFC. Even at 37 years old, doesn't worry me too much, because we've seen what Michael Venom Page has done in the UFC. It's not as if Pitbull's looking like he's depleted, declined, or anything like that. He's still a world-class elite fighter. I love the signing, and I also love this fight as well. Like the UFC, and look, I've said this before, and I know this is again narrative based, but I feel like I need to cover it. The UFC absolutely know what they're doing. I've got no idea how much Pitbull's on for this fight. I'm sure that'll be leaked afterwards, but I can guarantee you it's not for peanuts. Like the UFC will have paid Pitbull in this fight, and the last thing that the UFC want to do is take a dominant fighter from a rival promotion, pay them a shitload of money to come to the UFC. They've got a brand new toy. The last thing that they want to do is that brand new toy to be broken after one fight. The UFC know what they're doing when it comes to the matchmaking. I said this with Michael Venom Page's UFC debut against Kevin Holland. Michael Venom Page was an underdog. I cashed MVP as an underdog in that fight as well. The UFC absolutely knew what they were doing. Every man and his dog on Kevin Holland, or he's going to wrestle MVP. MVP's got holes, and it was an absolute clinical performance from MVP. The UFC matched it accordingly. They brought MVP from that same rival promotion. They put MVP probably on quite a lot of money, and the last thing that UFC wanted to do was that fighter that they've just brought in and paid a shitload of money to is to lose his opening fight in the UFC. Also, and I didn't call it with this one, so I can't claim that I did because I was actually on the other side, but Michael Chandler, exactly the same thing. Dominant multi-time champion from that rival promotion with Bellator. Obviously it wasn't Bellator PFL then. They brought Michael Chandler in from Bellator. Again, likely paid him a shitload of money. They put him against Dan Hooker. Now, Dan Hooker at the time, and still now, is a fighter floating around the top of the division, a dangerous fighter. I thought Hooker had everything to beat Michael Chandler. But guess what? The UFC knew what they were doing. They can't put these fighters that are being paid a shitload of money from the rival promotion against a mid-level fighter, because that's just not going to work for them. But they match them accordingly at the top of the division to, get that first UFC win, to work towards the hype, to build that fighter up. And I just think the same thing is happening with Pitbull in this fight against Yair Rodriguez. Yair Rodriguez is being matched against Pitbull. The UFC know what they're doing. Yair Rodriguez is a fighter that has got a lot of qualities, has got a really good skill set, a fighter that's been at the top of the division, been in and around the top of the division as well, within that top 3 to 5 ranking for many years. So it seems like a great fight for the UFC to make, but in my opinion, the UFC have made this fight for a specific reason. They don't want, or at least I wouldn't imagine that they would want Pitbull to come in on a lot of money from the rival Bellator PFL promotion to fight a fighter who's already been in and around the top, and it's not quite worked for them to lose to that type of fighter. So again, I know it's very narrative based, but I feel the UFC know what they're doing with the matchmaking in this fight. And then when it comes to style versus style, the analytical perspective, I think it's a good fight for Pitbull. Pitbull is a little bit shorter. He's got a lesser reach, but guess what? Pitbull has always been the shorter fighter with the lesser reach throughout the entirety of his career, pretty much. It's second nature to him to deal with taller, longer guys because he's had to do it his entire career. Even when you look at the specific size of Yair Rodriguez, he's fought and beaten guys, in my opinion, that are in and around Yair's quality and potentially even better at the same height and the reach of Rodriguez, that will pose different issues to Pitbull as well. Now, Rodriguez is predominantly a striker. He's got a tricky grappling game as well, to his credit, but he's predominantly a striker. He's a fighter that is tall, that is long, that prefers to fight at range, to fire his kicks in from the outside, to fire his punches straight down the middle from the outside. So that's where Rodriguez's range is going to be at in this fight if he's going to be successful. But Pitbull's got this like Muay Thai type of striking where it's slow, it's patient, it stalks forwards, but he does a good job of closing the distance. And this is where I think that Rodriguez is in trouble in this fight, because once Pitbull gets past that kicking range, which he will, in my opinion, on plenty of occasions in this fight, Yair Rodriguez can look a little bit lost in that boxing range. And that's where Pitbull, I think, is going to eat Rodriguez up, chopping down at low kicks, landing punches inside boxing range, where Yair Rodriguez isn't the best MMA boxer at this level. Of course, like I say, when I mean the best MMA boxer at this level, I mean at this high-end UFC level. And I think that he can potentially panic a little bit and get, start to get on his back foot and try to run away outside of that distance being closed, so he can get back out into open space, and then Pitbull closes the distance again. Pitbull's also got, sort of like a sporadic wrestling game as well. He won't hit too many takedowns, but he's very good at catching kicks. Again, Rodriguez on the outside throwing kicks. Pitbull could potentially catch a kick, take him down, or use the kick catch to close the distance. I just think stylistically, forget about the narrative side for a second, I think stylistically, this is a good fight for Pitbull. And I just feel that when you talk about levels in MMA, although it's going to be, competitive at times, this fight, I don't think Pitbull's going to steamroll Yair Rodriguez. I do think it's going to be competitive. I do think Yair Rodriguez could take a round, for example. So if it goes to a decision, I don't think it's going to be a straight, clear-cut 30-27 for Pitbull. But I just think that, again, where Yair Rodriguez is good, it's nothing that Pitbull hasn't seen and dealt with before at this type of level. But coming back to the MMA levels, I just think Pitbull's a level above Yair Rodriguez with experience, skill set, quality, and how high up he's already been in this sport. So, look, like I say, the narrative seems to be favouring Pitbull the way I'm seeing it. Style versus style. I think it's a good stylistic fight for Pitbull as well. So, guess what? I'm picking Patricio Pitbull to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting fight here. We've got Nikita Krylov versus Dominick Reyes. Now, Dominick Reyes has done a real, sort of U-turn on his UFC career. At one point, it looked like he was pretty much down and out. I think it was a 4-fight losing streak, being knocked out 2 or 3 times really badly within that losing streak as well. But now he's turned it around a little bit and he's on a 2-fight winning streak. However, if we're playing devil's advocate, those 2 wins are against Dustin Jacoby and Anthony Smith. The Jacoby win isn't a terrible one, actually. Jacoby's a good striker. It's just he's not a fighter that's at the top of the division, so we can't really say, look, Reyes is now winning against the same level of competition he went on a losing streak against. But the Anthony Smith one, that was the fight I think that Anthony Smith was walking out in absolute tears due to the personal loss that he suffered. And look, I've never ever seen a fight. Normally, look, when a fighter has that personal loss, they bottle it all up, they go out, they get the game face on, and more often than not, they get the job done as well. But with Smith, man, his head was not in fighting. He was in absolute bits on his walkout inside the cage, and to the point where I'm shocked that, the people around him actually let him fight that. And look, they might have told him, look, you shouldn't be fighting, but it might have been Smith that said, no, I'm doing it, I'm my own man, I can make these decisions. It might have been that scenario because, in my opinion, he just shouldn't have been in that fight, and he got absolutely torched by Reyes as well. And it was one of the most bizarre things that I've ever seen. A fighter clearly, having their head somewhere else, physically crying on the walkout and, stepping inside the cage. It was really rough to watch. But on the flip side, Krylov's also on a 3-fight win streak himself. And again, I suppose you could argue that those wins weren't against fighters at the top of the division. So this is why it's a really tricky fight to predict, in my opinion, because Krylov's always been one of those, sort of hard fighters to predict, at least for me anyway. And I've always had a difficult time really getting a good read on Krylov fights. When I think that he's going to win, he loses. When I think he's going to lose, he wins. He's got a good skill set, and he's a decent striker with a very tricky grappling game. And to his credit, he will switch up his game plan and switch up his style depending on who he fights. So with Dominick Reyes being a good striker, it wouldn't surprise me for Krylov to hit 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 takedowns if he needs to, and to get his grappling game going in front of Reyes. But the thing is, again, when I'm sort of dissecting this a little bit further, and I look at striking versus striking, yes, that's where Reyes' best path to victory is in this fight, probably only path to victory, to be fair, because if it is a wrestling and grappling type of fight, then that's Krylov's world. But I think that even if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I don't think Krylov's out of his depth. He can still strike. I just don't think he's quite as good of a striker as Reyes, so it gives Reyes the best options of winning. But I still think Krylov could be competitive over 15 minutes in a striking fight against Reyes. But then when you start to add the wrestling and grappling in with this being an MMA fight, I just think that Krylov will have his way there if he keeps going to the well with it. And I think, look, Reyes will probably stand up once, twice, 3 times and really, really make Krylov work for the takedowns and the top control time. But I kind of feel that that's going to do more damage to Reyes' cardio than it is to Krylov, with Krylov just making Reyes expend that energy and get back up to his feet constantly. And I think once 3 or 4 takedowns have potentially been either defended or Reyes has been put down and got up 3 or 4 times, I think that will eventually start to wear on Reyes the longer the fight goes on, and Krylov will start to have more success with the wrestling and grappling. So, like I say, I do think it's a tricky fight, because if Reyes comes out, obviously all fights start standing. If Reyes comes out and puts it on Krylov early, I think Reyes could knock Krylov out. And this is why it's tricky. Like, what version of Krylov are we going to get? Are we going to get a version of Krylov where he's going to accept a striking war and get knocked out? Or are we going to get a version of Krylov where he hangs on the striking until he can get his entries into the takedowns? And that's why it's tough. Like, I kind of feel like from the betting perspective, the line probably should be a bit closer. But when you're looking at ways that fighters win specific fights, I think that Krylov, again, look, if he won a 15-minute kickboxing fight, it's not going to shock me, but it would shock me if Reyes won a fight that was won and lost in the wrestling and grappling. So the bigger gap in skill is within the wrestling and grappling, and I think Krylov is a much better striker than Reyes is a wrestler and grappler. So the weaknesses that each fighter have got, I think Krylov is a lesser, weaker fighter from the all-round perspective, if that makes sense. So that's the side that I'm having to lean with. For those reasons, I'm picking Nikita Krylov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a tricky one as well. We've got Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson. Now, initially, this was like a pick-em. I think maybe Woodson, the very slight underdog. And even at that, I was still a bit like, yeah, like, I'm just unsure. Like, I really like Woodson. He's tall, he's long, he's a good striker, good MMA boxer that's worked on wrestling and grappling, but he hasn't fought anybody at the level of Dan Ige yet. And although Woodson's going to have his height, his reach, his range advantage, like, Dan Ige's a savvy vet. He can strike his way into the pocket. He's got raw power as well. Then he's got wrestling and grappling. And again, at a certain level, Dan Ige can get out-wrestled and grappled himself, but that level does tend to be towards the upper end of the division, like the top of the ranked version of the ranked portion of the division. Whereas Sean Woodson's not at that level. So I'm kind of just left thinking, well, I'm just super unsure of, look, I know that Sean Woodson's gonna land on Ige. I think Woodson's gonna have a lot of success in this fight, but on the flip side, Dan Ige, he's too good, too savvy, too experienced, too much of a veteran just to allow himself to be pieced up on the outside. Like, he's gonna close the distance. I think he is going to get takedowns on Woodson. I think there's going to be a gap in skill on the mat grappling. Even though Woodson's okay, I think Ige is going to be a level above there. I just think it's going to come down to, like, the striking. Like, is Ige going to be able to close the distance often enough to be able to get off on good strikes himself? But then the wrestling as well. Like, is Woodson going to be able to defend the takedowns? I just think that, I know I'm not providing a lot of helpful information here, but I'm just really stumped with this fight, because I could see both fighters have got paths to victory. I could see both fighters being stylistically better on the night when we actually see the fight playing out. Like, let's say Sean Woodson comes out, starts piecing him up on the outside and, defends some takedowns or maybe drops around, but then he's in the fight and he's doing better work on the feet, whereas Ige is constantly trying to close the different distance, getting peppered on his way in, getting a takedown, then Woodson stands back up and Ige maybe gets 2 or 3 takedowns in a round, but Woodson's doing the better work on the feet and the judges score it to Woodson. Or maybe Woodson gets a late finish. Like, that wouldn't shock me. But on the flip side, if it's Dan Ige that's closing the distance, landing on Woodson inside of that boxing range and then mixing in takedowns. So it might be one punch, 2 punch level change into a takedown against the cage, gets Woodson down, gets a hook in, Woodson gets back up, starts trying to get his distance, but he closes that distance again, gets the takedown again, and just puts her on like a veteran performance. I can absolutely see that as well. So this is where I'm just a little bit, like I say, stumped with this fight, because I can see a clear way of both fighters looking great against their opponent stylistically, and both fighters have the ways to win and the paths to victory. I'm unsure. So when I'm unsure from a betting podcast perspective, as I always say, I'm just going to side with the underdog, because I genuinely believe that this fight should be a -110, -115 pick'em on either side. So for those reasons, I'm picking the underdog, Dan Ige, to win this fight. And in the next fight, stylistically, this is interesting. We've got Virna Jandiroba versus Xiaonan. So stylistically, I just think it's a horrific fight for Xiaonan. And look, to where Xiaonan is as well, I've been a fan of Xiaonan when she came into the UFC. I've cashed her on multiple occasions as an underdog, and I've always been a fan of her style, her aggression, the fact that she brings something different. And I just don't know where she's going to be at now, because she had a rise to the top. She got beaten by Zhang Weili, who just turns out nobody's going to be beating her for a while. And, that's not a knock on Xiaonan. She went in there, and actually the way that she fought against Zhang Weili is probably better than most other fighters have in recent fights. Like, look at Zhang Weili's last fight, it was dominant. Like, against Xiaonan, there was dominant moments as well for Zhang Weili, but it wasn't that level of dominance. So I'm just wondering where Xiaonan's at, because she's had a time at the top now, she's had the championship fight, and she probably is aware right now that Weili Zhang is just operating on a completely different level, and likely will be for a certain amount of time. So where does that leave her? Now, that's just the mentality perspective. She might be absolutely bulletproof and come into this fight, and it has, the championship loss has no effect on how she's going to fight here. But with Virna Jandiroba is a legitimate grappler. And this is where Xiaonan has had her problems in the UFC. She can get taken down when she gets put on her back. If she's got a decent topside grappler on top of her, she just can't get up. She gets stuck and, eats ground and pound, is liable to be submitted. And I just think that stylistically it's a horrific fight. Now, for whatever reason, if she can prevent takedowns here against Jandiroba, then I think Xiaonan absolutely lights her up. So this is your stylistic clash, because I think that Jandiroba's got a massive advantage with the wrestling and grappling, and I think Xiaonan's got a massive advantage with the striking. It's just, in these types of fights, I kind of always lean towards the wrestler and grappler, because it's Xiaonan that needs to be very careful of the ranges. Like, she needs to not get too close. She needs to constantly be aware, have the P's and Q's, mind the P's and Q's consistently throughout the fight as well. Whereas Jandiroba's job is just get forward. They're in a cage at the end of the day. The distance will be closed at some point. And Jandiroba just does a good job of getting takedowns. And I think that whereas Jandiroba was a little bit spotty where she first came into the UFC, trading some wins and losses, and you didn't really know how to place her, I think she's actually putting together a good run of form. I think she's being comfortable inside the cage. She knows what she needs to do. She's developing that aspect of a game as well, and being able to get takedowns in fights, because that was one of her issues. In some fights she could get takedowns, in others she couldn't. But she seems to be hitting this consistent form now of where she's getting the takedowns that she needs. And she's one of the best grapplers in the division when she gets on top. And then, like I say, Xiaonan, unfortunately, against that top level grappler is someone that's super susceptible to just getting stuck and running out of ideas when she gets put on her back. So, yeah, look, for me, both fighters have the path to victory here, but Jandiroba's gap in skill is just it's just way much wider than what Xiaonan's is, in my opinion. Like, Xiaonan is the clear better striker, but Jandiroba's a better wrestler and grappler than Xiaonan is a striker, in my opinion, and that should lead to takedowns. And if takedowns happen in this fight, I just don't see Xiaonan winning. So for those reasons, I'm picking Virna Jandiroba to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chase Hooper versus Jim fucking Miller. Now, it's not a pay-per-view, it's not a numbered event without Jim Miller, and of course, he's on the card this weekend. Now, the unfortunate side is, I think, look, if this fight was like 10 years ago, and Hooper wasn't 10 years younger, so Hooper is where he is now, so if the fight, I suppose the better way of putting it is 10 years ago for Jim Miller alone, then yeah, look, I think Jim Miller's absolutely live here, but I just feel that, look, age is a thing, and I just don't know how much Jim Miller's got left in the tank, and he'll probably tell you that he's still good for years. And in a straight grappling fight, I think that Miller's got, he's still got the skill set and ability to deal with a good grappler. It's just Chase Hooper seems to be leveling up quite a lot in regards to the striking as well. Now, does have to mind his P's and Q's, again, because Jim Miller is a dangerous striker. He can land that left hand, he can hit hard, but Chase Hooper, like I say, he's dropping legitimate kickboxers like Vyacheslav Borshev, that was super shocking to see, to be fair, but also testament to the work that Hooper's putting in, because Hooper could have potentially been down and out with the UFC after his first few fights. I think he was brought in a little bit too early, a little bit too green, a little bit too young, and he took some losses that I think would have actually killed the mentality of a lot of young fighters, but it didn't with Hooper, and again, that's testament to who he is as a person and as a fighter as well. But in this specific fight, I think on the feet, Hooper's going to be way faster, way quicker, way harder to hit, in and out of range. And again, I'm making him sound like he's this elite striker, and I wouldn't say he's a world-class striker, but I just think the youthfulness, the age, and like I say, the speed and the movement are going to be huge advantages for Hooper in this fight. And then when the fight does inevitably hit the mat, because I believe it will, like, Hooper's super tricky, and again, speed of transitions, being able to, sort of escape anything that Miller's doing. Because, look, Miller is very meat and potatoes with his grappling, on top, transitions. You'll show you back, trying to get back up, he'll take you back and he'll choke you. But Hooper's got a very good level of grappling where I don't think he's gonna be susceptible to that type of grappling offense that Miller's got. So I'm just having a hard time seeing, and again, the thing is with Miller, in my opinion, you can see that decline getting worse after each fight, and I just think coming in against a younger, quicker, fresher fighter like Hooper, who's not going to get rolled over in the grappling where Jim Miller's notoriously been absolutely elite for years, I just think it's a tough fight for Miller. I think Hooper's going to do the better work on the feet. I'm not saying he's the better striker, he may be, but I just think with the speed and the movement, I think, and the youthfulness, the athleticism, I think those are specific advantages that is going to allow Hooper to be more efficient on the feet. And then when it comes to the grappling, I really hope that we see some grappling here, because I think it'll be a real spectacle. But again, I anticipate the quicker, more agile fighter to come out on top, especially within the scrambles as well. And Jim Miller has been stuck on his back against other good grapplers, like Sedriques had a good moment, had some good moments on top of Miller as an example. I think Hooper's going to be able to have good moments there as well. So, like I say, more efficient on the feet, probably the more likely to do the better work on the mat as well. For those reasons, I'm picking Chase Hooper to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Darren Elkins versus Julian Erosa. Now, the first thing that we've got to talk about here is the betting line. It's insane. Darren Elkins at plus 300. Okay, look, Elkins is closer towards the end of his career than he is to his prime. Fully understand that. He's a guy that's got a shitload of scar tissue on his face, gets cut up, bleeds pretty much every fight. Not a good look for the judges, real bad optics. And he's a fighter that, probably isn't as good as what he was within his prime. So, which is again, it's fair to say. So at plus 300, like a Darren Elkins at plus 300 in the UFC, I completely understand it. But only against a certain level of competition. Like if he's fighting somebody ranked, then yeah, plus 300 all day. Probably not going to get too much argument from me, again, depending on the opponent, but just from a generalist perspective. Whereas Julian Erosa, who isn't top 15, who isn't top 20, who isn't top 30 in the UFC, being a near 4-1 favourite is absolutely insane. Like, I understand that he's making improvements. I think he's been at Extreme Couture. I understand that he's a lot fresher than a Darren Elkins. And would I be shocked if Erosa came in there and knocked Elkins out? Well, no, because of the things that I've already explained about Elkins being towards the end of his career. But man, Elkins is probably arguably looking the best he's looked since he had that, that winning streak earlier in his UFC career. Like, Elkins, I wouldn't call it a comeback or a resurgence, but he's still super tough. He's still super difficult to beat, and he's still winning fights where, some people, myself included, are expecting him to lose certain fights. He's coming out and he's winning, and he's proving that, experience and veteran qualities matter a lot at this level in the UFC. And again, if he was fighting somebody ranked, then I could understand the plus 300, but Julian Erosa isn't a fighter that's going to be putting 3, 4, 5 fight win streaks together in the UFC. Julian Erosa is another fighter that, to his credit, does win when we expect him to lose. He can absolutely have some great performances, but is a fighter that will always trade wins and losses in the UFC, that won't build that consistency and form at a certain level in the UFC. And I just think that this fight, when it was announced, I thought, well, this is going to be a scrap. Like, Julian Erosa is going to put it on Elkins, but I had that feeling that this is one of these types of fights that Elkins seems to win, like against a fighter that isn't going to impose too much on them, where Elkins can have moments getting his own game going, getting the takedowns, getting the top control time. I expect Erosa to come out early, cut Elkins' scar tissue on his face, make all that blood flow. Elkins then turns it up from there. That seems to be where Elkins gets going. Elkins gets takedowns, Erosa tries to get back up, shows his back, Elkins takes her back. Like, I just think it's just going to be super competitive, super close. I think it's excellent matchmaking from an entertainment perspective. But then to see that there's a plus 300 dog in this fight with a minus 400 favourite, even if you wanted to argue the other way around, if it was Erosa at plus 300 and Elkins at minus 400, I would be saying the exact same thing. There shouldn't be a big underdog in a fight that's going to be this close, this competitive, against two fighters that, do trade wins and losses, that aren't really going to, that aren't going to be pushing into the rankings, in my opinion. The two fighters that love to scrap, that love to make it dirty, ugly, grindy, gritty. It's just excellent matchmaking. It's going to be an excellent fight. It's going to be super fun to watch. But again, it's a betting podcast, and I'm seeing a plus 300 underdog and a minus 400 favourite in this type of fight. It just blows my mind. I just really can't explain it. And look, there is a world in which Erosa does cover that minus 400, because if he comes out in round one and knocks Elkins out, then he's covered his minus 400 tag. It's just, I just don't know how likely that is. Elkins is a dog in there. It's super tough to get him out. He's always going to be grinding and trying to recover. And again, he's not fighting a top 15 ranked guy that is very likely going to run through him. It's a Julian Erosa who is in and around Elkins' level anyway, but it's Elkins with the dog in him, it's Elkins with the experience, it's Elkins with more wins in the UFC. I'm just having a hard time, like I say, trying to understand the betting line. And like I say, it's a betting podcast, and more often than not, when I think there's a fight that is very even, very close, very competitive, but then I'm getting an underdog, I'll normally side with the underdog. But when it's an underdog at plus 300 in that type of fight, I'm definitely, from a straight pick and prediction perspective, siding with that fighter as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Darren Elkins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sedriques Dumas versus Michal Oleksiejczuk. Now, this is a fight where, again, I'm just a little bit unsure, more on the side of Michal Oleksiejczuk, because there was rumours about, how committed he is to fighting in MMA, and he's on a 3-fight losing streak as well, which, you lose your 4th fight in the UFC, and that's probably you cut more often than not from the roster. So Oleksiejczuk's in a position where he absolutely has to win. But if his head and his mind isn't really in it anyway, then you just wonder how that's going to reflect from a performance perspective. But, looking out of that, because those are variables that we just are unsure of. We don't know what he's thinking. We don't know where his mindset's at. So looking at the fight itself, what makes it difficult is, yes, Oleksiejczuk's on this 3-fight losing streak, but he's been fighting some really good opponents, whereas Sedriques Dumas has traded some wins and losses in the UFC, but he's looking like a fighter that is developing, a fighter that is more for the future in the UFC than what Oleksiejczuk is, in my opinion. But Dumas hasn't been beating like the competition at the level of Oleksiejczuk. And I mean, at the level Oleksiejczuk's at as a fighter, he certainly hasn't been fighting the level of opponents Oleksiejczuk's been fighting, albeit Oleksiejczuk's losing against those fighters. So you've got a situation where we do see it quite often in the UFC, where one fighter is losing fights, but losing against good quality opposition, whereas the other fighter's winning, but winning against a lower level competition. So how is it going to match up inside the cage? Now, when you look at style versus style, you've got Dumas that seems to be more well-rounded, like he can strike, but he will look to wrestle and grapple, whereas Oleksiejczuk does look to be a pure striker. You know, rips to the body, rips to the head. He's got some real good qualities as a striker, actually, but Oleksiejczuk can be got at from that wrestling and grappling perspective. So I kind of feel that we've got a fight here where there's two fighters with obvious paths to victory. I think if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Oleksiejczuk wins the fight. I think he closes the distance. He lands to the body and to the head of Dumas, puts some good combinations together, and I just think he's a genuinely better MMA striker. But this is MMA, and I do think Dumas is going to mix in the wrestling and the grappling, and I think he can get at Oleksiejczuk. So that's where Dumas's path to victory is. I just think it's a super tough fight to call. Like I say, it's always difficult where one fighter's losing but against good quality competition, whereas the opponent is winning but against a lower level of competition. Then you add in the fact that Oleksiejczuk is on a 3-fight losing streak, and there could be that additional pressure if he loses the fourth that he might get cut from the roster. But then, you know, add in an extra element to that in regards to the rumours that you hear of whether his mindset is in it anyway. It's just tough. So I think it's one of those fights where the betting line should be closer. You do have Oleksiejczuk that's a slight to moderate favourite. I would think that look, I've got no problems with Oleksiejczuk being a favourite in this fight, but I would say probably should be more -125, -130, opposed to sort of your -175, if that makes sense. So I think the line should be a little bit closer. But I am going to side on the side of Dumas here. I think that Dumas's trajectory is a little bit better, more comfortable in the UFC, getting a little bit better, and I think the weakness of Oleksiejczuk is greater than the weakness of Dumas. So I think Oleksiejczuk is more likely to get got at with the wrestling and grappling than Dumas is within the striking. And again, look, it's not going to shock me for Oleksiejczuk to win this fight, but I've just got a gut feeling on Dumas for a fight that I am a little bit unsure about. So for those reasons, I'm picking Sedriques Dumas to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another fight that's a little bit tricky as well. We've got Sumudaerji versus Mitch Raposo. Now, with Mitch Raposo, he's had a tough, run under the UFC banner to date. Only 2 fights under the UFC banner. The Contender Series loss against Jake Hadley, who, although Jake Hadley's not with the UFC anymore, I still think is a UFC-level fighter. And then the loss to Andre Lima, who's looking like he's going to surge potentially at some point up to a title fight, in my opinion. I definitely think that the skill set that Andre Lima's got and the way he executes, he's going to go on I think he's going to go on a big win streak. I think he'll take a loss at some point, but it'll be a loss against a high-level opponent. But coming back to Raposo, that's a difficult fight for anybody right now at this level in the UFC. So you can't really hold that against Raposo. Whereas Sumudaerji, just like I said with Oleksiejczuk, he's on a 3-fight losing streak, but those 3 fights that he's lost are against good level opponents that are tricky to beat. But the thing is with Sumudaerji, I was massively high on this guy before he took that first loss of the 3, and I thought that this guy's got a skill set that might allow him to really rise up in the flyweight division, and it hasn't kind of worked out like that for him. He's shown that he has got some holes in his game in regards to that wrestling and grappling, which is where Mitch Raposo is kind of good as well. And again, I see this as a very binary fight. You've got Sumudaerji, who I think is the absolute better striker here, but then you've got Sumudaerji that's also got holes within his wrestling and grappling, and Mitch Raposo is a good wrestler and a grappler. I think if the fight's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Sumudaerji lights Raposo up, potentially finishes him. But if it's a wrestling and grappling based fight, then I think that Mitch Raposo is going to absolutely have his way with Sumudaerji. I think he's going to get in on takedowns and do good work on top of him. So it's ultimately how this fight plays out and which fighter is the one that activates the game plan and forces the game plan on the opponent. Now, Mitch Raposo, I just think we're going to see a little bit of everything here. I think Raposo will get takedowns in this fight, but I think he's going to have to work for them and be smart because Sumudaerji is a very sniper type of striker. So when Raposo is thinking about closing the distance to get into range to shoot a takedown, Sumudaerji is going to be firing things straight down the middle, which is going to be very difficult, and he's always quite difficult for a wrestler to close the distance. If there were big looping punches, then that's great for a wrestler. You can level change on that, shoot a takedown, get underneath the looping punch and get in, enter into the takedown and secure the takedown. But when it's straight down the middle, it's a little bit tougher. So this is where stylistically it might start favouring Sumudaerji just a little bit. But like I say, both fighters have got legitimate paths to victory. I just think that Sumudaerji has faced a better level of competition, does have the upside on the experience level in the UFC as well. And then Mitch Raposo's got to walk through or got to get through fire in this fight to get his own game plan going, which I do think that he might steal around here from Sumudaerji, because I do think at some point he is going to close the distance and get in on a takedown, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to do it often enough to take this fight away from Sumudaerji and make it a fight that's won and lost within the wrestling and grappling. I kind of feel that Sumudaerji is going to be doing the better work on the feet and landing on Raposo as Raposo's trying to take him down, and if Raposo starts feeling that the fight's slowly pulling away from him, those takedowns might become more desperate, which is then going to leave him open to strikes up the middle, like your knees and your elbows, and your uppercuts. So yeah, look, I think it's a close and competitive fight. I think they've both got paths to victory, but I give the slight stylistic edges over to Sumudaerji. For those reasons, I'm picking Sumudaerji to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tresean Gore versus Marco Tulio. Now, look, in regards to Tresean Gore, I was wrong about the last one. I'll always tell you when I'm right. I'll always tell you when I'm wrong. Look, I was wrong about the last fight when he fought Antonio Trocoli, but I feel like I was more wrong on Trocoli than what I was on Gore. Like, I thought Trocoli had something to give in the UFC at this level, and it just turned out that he doesn't. And I still think Trocoli has got somewhat of a decent skill set, but it's really not worked out for him in the UFC. And Tresean Gore, as a fighter, to his credit, is improved and developed so much, because this was a pretty green and raw fighter coming off the Ultimate Fighter with a really good striking game, power, Muay Thai style, and he looked really exciting. But then he dropped a couple of losses and he didn't quite look the way that we thought. But then he comes in against Josh Fremd and suddenly, he's NCAA Tresean Gore and, was looking for the takedowns and ended up submitting Josh Fremd. And then, of course, against Antonio Trocoli, the same thing there as well. So Gore's a fighter that's really you can clearly see he's put a lot of time and effort into his wrestling and grappling, and it will serve him well in the UFC. But I kind of feel myself leaning against Gore again, and it might be to my demise, but I feel like Marco Tulio stylistically is going to be way more difficult to beat than a Josh Fremd and an Antonio Trocoli. And I've actually, I think Fremd is a UFC caliber fighter towards the bottom end of the UFC, but a UFC caliber fighter nonetheless. Obviously with Trocoli, I think that, his time might be done with the UFC, but Marco Tulio is definitely a better fighter, in my opinion, than both Fremd and Trocoli. So Gore, again, we're going to see how much he's leveled up, because if Gore comes out here and beats Marco Tulio, then yeah, look, we could be looking at a fighter that is now on a path to a seriously high trajectory. But I just don't think it happens. Marco Tulio seems to be quite good everywhere. Like, he seems to be a decent striker, wrestler, grappler, both offensively and defensively in all those areas as well. But he's very stoic. So I don't think that he's going to allow Gore to really starting to get his game going and getting in on takedowns or closing the distance and landing hard on him. Tulio's a better fighter than that, and I kind of don't feel that we even saw the best version of him in his last fight anyway. I kind of feel like Gore's going to bring the best out of Tulio in this fight, which is then going to be bad news for Gore because I think Tulio is just a better quality fighter. It's going to be close. It's going to be competitive. I don't think Tulio's going to whitewash him or knock him out clean in round one like he did his last opponent, but I do think when you're looking at which fighter's the better quality MMA fighter, I think it's Tulio, and that should show in regards to both performance and result as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Marco Tulio to win this fight. And in the next fight, the last fight to break down of the podcast, we've got Nora Cornell versus Hayley Cowan. Now, I kind of feel like this is a little bit of a levels fight. Now, I'm not saying that Nora Cornell is like a high-level fighter in the UFC. I mean, she might get there at some point, you never know. But there's still a level difference, in my opinion. Even, you can have a level difference at every level in the UFC, at the top, the middle, the bottom. And I think that Cornell is a level above Cowan. Like, Cornell's got wins over Jocelyn Edwards and Melissa Mullins. Now, the Jocelyn Edwards fight, you can argue that was a robbery, and you'd probably be right in making that argument, but she's still got a win over Jocelyn Edwards and Melissa Mullins. And especially Melissa Mullins, like, that's a phenomenal win because I rate Mullins quite highly. Now, with Hayley Cowan, she's coming off a loss on a UFC debut against Jamie Lynn Horth. Now, admittedly, Horth is one of these fighters that can be difficult to beat just because she's got this bullish approach inside the cage. She's strong, she's physical, and she can muscle you around. And then she's got, a bit of a wrestling game, whereas Cornell's different. She's predominantly a striker. But I just think that if you're looking at this fight playing out on the feet, I think it's Cornell all day long. And I just don't think Cowan, even if she does try to go to the wrestling and grappling, I'm just not sure at what level she'll be successful. And I just feel that even if Cowan does shoot takedowns and gets wrestling and grappling going, I just don't think it's going to be enough to make this fight won and lost within the wrestling and grappling. I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. And at moments, Cowan might have some good moments and might make a couple of the rounds a little bit closer than maybe what I'm anticipating pre-fight, but I just think Cornell's a better, like I've just said with Marco Tulio, I think Cornell is a better quality fighter, a better mixed martial artist in this specific fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nora Cornell to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. It's been a little bit longer than what I wanted it to be, but I spent quite a bit of time on the main event, the co-main event, and then, of course, the introduction to the UFC of Patricio Pitbull. So that's what's just dragged this podcast a little bit longer. But as always, thank you for everybody tuning in, whether it's on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, and, of course, for everybody over on YouTube as well. If you are listening on one of the podcast streaming platforms, please feel free to come over to YouTube as well, where you can leave a comment on the video, where we can have a discussion if that's what you want to do. Tell me who you're betting on, tell me who we disagree on, tell me anything that you want to tell me, and I'm sure if you're a decent person, I will respond throughout the week and we can have that conversation. It also really helps our YouTube algorithms as well, which makes the podcast be seen by more people. And of course, whilst you are on the YouTube channel, please subscribe to the channel as well. It doesn't cost you a penny, free to do, and you get an email update every time a podcast drops on a Monday. And of course, it's super helpful to us and the YouTube channel as well. And for one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend at UFC 314, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler. All the betting subscription packages are super affordable. Plenty of content on there from the professional handicapper, from Base AI, our UFC prediction software. And of course, we've got, like I say, everything for every type of gambler. $5 for one event, $9.99 monthly, or $99 for the entire year. That's all at MMAplay365.com. We are on a 1 week break next week. There is no UFC next week. So I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.